Hello and welcome back. Today I want to share with you a pretty special game. This is one of my favorite games that I have played. I played it about 2-3 months ago. My opponent was rated 2,150 and I think at the time I was rated about 2,043. I had the white pieces and my opponent played e6 after I had played e4, so I thought we're going to get a French defense, and that's exactly what we got. And the way I like to play against that is to go into the advanced variation but play it with a little twist. Now typically in the advanced variation this d4 pawn becomes the center of the game. Black will slowly build up pressure on the d4 pawn. They'll look to reroute this knight in various different ways to try and build pressure on the d4 pawn, and white is doing everything that he can to defend that pawn. The way I like to play is actually to give up the d4 pawn in exchange for development, and that's what we see in this game. This registers as a slight mistake from both of us, but the position is still entirely even here. And I'm basically hoping that my opponent is going to take on c3 here so that I can get some nice rapid development. They come and attack my knight, but I just castle here because I'm quite happy for them to take and allow me to take back on c3. I'm going to get some open lines for my rook, and I will be able to slot my knight into the d4 square, and if it's ever captured, I'm going to be able to rebuild my center after I play something like f4, for example. Anyway, my opponent plays what looks like a normal developing move, bringing the knight to c6, and I play here bishop e3. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this a dreadful mistake because you've just walked into this fork? Well, actually, no, it's the pawn fork itself that my opponent plays that is the mistake. The reason is I can freely capture this pawn, and if they capture back with their knight, which is another mistake, well, this is an old trick in the French. I can just grab this knight and they are unable to capture back with their queen because I would have bishop b5 check, and after they interpose with their bishop, I would be picking up their queen, or they're going to have to drop back with their queen and interpose, after which I would still be picking up their queen. But in this position, I played an even sharper line, which was queen g4, going after the g7 pawn, basically saying, you can't move your knight from being captured because it is still pinned to the queen, and now I am attacking your g7 pawn as well. So if you play bishop c5 to reinforce this, well, I'm going to take on g7, and then I'm going to win your rook, and then I'm likely to win this knight as well, and that's going to be pretty dreadful for you. So my opponent responded here by playing the move g6. Now, of course, I can't capture back, but I can go ahead and grab the knight. The queen defends here, so my opponent can't recapture. And so my opponent dropped their queen back to d8, allowing me to jump my knight into b5. Now, I want to point out that around this time, I think I had about 7 minutes on my clock. My opponent was ahead in time. He had about 8 minutes. And I spent 5.5 minutes in this position calculating the following. And it paid off. Once my knight hops into b5, I am threatening this. However, the queen defends this, so I would like, if I had the time, to bring a rook to c1, so that after my knight hops into b5, I'm going to get my knight into c7 and then fork my opponent's king and rook. The problem is that if I play rook c1 now, they play a6, and I'm not getting this knight to b5. They're just simply going to take the knight. But what I had calculated, and I was very, 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 very pleased with this, was that after knight b5, which is what was played, and they play a6, I now have an absolutely killer move. You can pause the video to see if you can find it for yourself if you like, but the move is bishop to b6. Now this looks like a crazy move. You're just attacking the queen, but the queen can freely grab the bishop, but there are a number of lines here, and I had calculated all of these before I had hopped the knight into b5. And the first would be, okay, they just grab the knight. Well, then they've lost their queen, and that's not good, and fine, they grab here, but then I'm winning the bishop, so you've lost a queen and a piece for 2 pieces. That's not good. So alternatively, you might come down and take my bishop on d3. Now, after I chase you away with one of these rooks, then you're picking up my knight and still hitting my bishop. But what I had calculated was simply, once they take the bishop, I have this intermezzo, this check on the king and the rook, and then I'm picking up their bishop. And then their rook is going to have to come here, their king hasn't castled because it's moved, because it's been checked, and then my rooks are going to come into the center, and I'm going to have a fantastic game from that position. But the move that I was really hoping my opponent would play is queen takes on b6. Because then I can take their bishop. And then you might be thinking, all right, well, then they win your knight. But then I'm able to capture back with check. Now you're probably thinking, well, why is that so good? Because, you know, they could just interpose here. Well, if they interpose here with the bishop, then after I take and check the king, that's a discovered attack on their queen. So I had calculated all of this before I played knight b5. And look at what happens. My opponent captured. I capture back. They take the knight, as I thought they would, and I check. Now, of course, they don't have to interpose, right? They can just move the king. But what I had also calculated from all the way back here, you can tell I'm very pleased with this game. From all the way back here, I had calculated, was that if they don't interpose with the bishop, allowing me to get this discovered check on the queen, they have to move the king to d8, because my queen would be here, blocking this diagonal, and my bishop would be here, blocking this diagonal. At which point I would have this rook check, and the king would have to step over. At which point I calculated I would have another check, and the only way for the king to escape would be to scoot back to b8. After which I had calculated one more move, which we are about to see. It is the game's brilliancy, and it is why I am so proud of this game. I spent 5.5 minutes on this, and it really, really paid off. They captured. We've seen this. Okay, fine. We've seen this. Now, if they interpose with the bishop, they've simply lost the game. So they don't. They step their king over to d8. But of course, check. Now they move. Check. Now they fall back. Now what's the brilliancy? What is the brilliancy here? Rook sacks for the bishop on c8. Why is this so strong? Well, it brings the king to a light square. So the king steps out here, and now I have this discovered attack. Again, it's actually supported by the rook this time, and I win the queen. All of that had been calculated from this position before I played knight b5. However, when I actually reached the position, when I actually got here and played rook takes on c8 and the king recaptured, because of course, if the king slides out this way, well then it's just as dreadful, because now I have this check and you're giving away your queen. So, the king captured. Now I had calculated this, but what's even better in this position is this. This is mate in 2. The only square for the king is to come to c7, and now rook, d7, checkmate. I am so enormously proud of this game. This is the highest rated opponent I have ever beaten, and I was, worried way back in this position that I might have just miscalculated something. And I thought, if I get this wrong, I've probably lost the game. I've used about 50 to 70% of my clock calculating all of these variations, and there is likely to be something that I have overlooked. So when this sequence played out exactly as imagined, I was able to play all these moves in about 20 seconds because I was just checking that everything was as I had planned. And when we got here, it was just game over. My opponent shortly resigned, and I took the win from the highest rated opponent I have beaten to date. I hope you enjoyed the game. I hope I can persuade you to be bold enough to give up the d4 pawn in the French. There's an excellent video on playing this way against the French by Chess Dojo, I think. I will put the link to that in the description so you can see for yourself. I might cover it in future, but for now, that video will suit you just perfectly if you think that this looks like an interesting way to play. There'll certainly be more coverage of games like this to come, but in the meantime, please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Take care.